So, as we go through this morning, I think there are three people and three lessons that we need to focus on. There's three people. There's Jesus, there's John, and kind of the rest of the disciples, and Judas. Those are the kind of the three main people in this story, in this narrative. And so we're going to focus on each one of those and the lessons that we can apply to our own lives. So the first point in your outline is Jesus stayed involved. Jesus stayed involved. I'm going to read verse 21 and 22 again. It says, after saying these things, Jesus was troubled in his spirit and testified, truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me. The disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom he spoke. So what do I mean by Jesus stayed involved? Well, if we take this passage and we look at it through the lens of relationships, and we look at it through the eyes that Jesus would have had toward Judas, I think it points out something very interesting and sometimes very convicting about our own life. See, Jesus knew what was going to happen, and so he was still involved in Judas's life. We learned last week, right before this passage, the passage that he says after he said these things, after this happened, then all of this starts, that was when Jesus washed the disciples' feet. Right? Jesus had just gotten finished wiping off the grime and the dirt, serving, humbling himself, showing what a servant was to the very man that would betray him. Jesus chose to involve himself in Judas's life, even knowing that Judas was going to betray him. So many times when we have a difficult relationship, that's the exact opposite of what we want to do, right? If we have someone we don't like, or we have someone we know is talking behind our back or stabbing us in the back, or someone who is out to get us or betray us, the last thing we want to do is be involved with that person and in their life. We would rather just write them off, at the best, usually. That's the best we are. And other times, we're ready to throw right back at them. We're ready to attack. We're ready to have, to show a heart of hate. But that's not what Jesus did. Jesus chose to involve himself in Judas's life and situation. He invested into Judas, even though that was probably what we would have considered a really bad investment. We talked a lot, I'm going to use my grandpa a lot this week, guys, just because it's so fresh on my mind, but we talked a lot yesterday, my grandfather, and how he was a businessman who helped just transform the company he worked for, a couple of them. And his big focus was on the customer, was, making sure you understood and you met the customer's needs. It doesn't really matter if they're going to respond the way that you want them to respond. It's not going to matter. You don't invest in people just because they're going to bring you a profit. You invest in people because it's the right thing to do. Jesus invested his life into Judas because it was the right thing to do, even knowing that Judas was never going to come around. Even knowing that Judas was going to betray him, Jesus said, it's okay and he is worth my time, my love, and my service. That's hard for me to accept, right? That's hard for me to do. That's hard for me to follow, but Jesus was the model, and Jesus stayed involved in Judas's life. The 2 points here is Jesus was involved with Judas even though Jesus knew the result. We've already talked about that. Jesus knew what was going to happen. This isn't in your outline, but I want to read a couple passages. First one is John 6, verse 70 through 71. We talked about this several weeks ago. Jesus answered them, "Did I not choose you, the 12? And yet one of you is a devil." He spoke of Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, for he, one of the 12, was going to betray him. And then in John 13, 17 through 10, just what we talked about last week, Jesus says, "If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. I am not speaking of all of you. I know whom I have chosen, but the scripture will be fulfilled. He who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. I am telling you this now before it takes place, so that when it does take place, you may believe that I am he." See, Jesus knew that Judas was going to betray him from the very beginning. He knew the result, but he stayed anyway. He was involved anyway. But more importantly, that Jesus knew the result, he also understood the reason, which is your next fill-in. There's a couple words here that I want to bring out. Thank you, John, for doing this part of the sermon for me. John and I collaborate a lot, and he helps me out. But one of the things that he told me when we were emailing back and forth, and he touched base on a little bit, is this word troubled that we can kind of dig into a little bit and unpack. See, it literally means to stir up, like stir to movement. It's this idea that Jesus felt compelled to share these words. Why? Why was Jesus compelled to point this fact out? Personally, and after doing a lot of research, there's a lot of different reasons and things why, but I think this was one of his final attempts to get through to Judas. See, Jesus was seeing this. He had walked for 3 years with this man. He knew what was in his heart. He knew the sin and the pride and the greed that Judas contained. We have talked about that over the several sermons already. He saw what was within Judas. He knew what was about to happen, and he could not bear to be silent. Why? Because Jesus was going to betray him. I'm just going to read this idea of betrayal. The definition is to deliver a person into the control of someone else, involving either the handing over, maybe of a guilty person to the authorities for punishment, or maybe to an individual or to an enemy who will presumably take undue advantage of the victim. See, sometimes I think betrayal is just lack of loyalty, just not doing something for the other person, or writing them off, or just taking an action against them. That's the idea of betrayal to me. But it's not really that. But see, betrayal is saying, I'm going to turn you over to someone I know is going to cause you harm. There is a very deep and dark place inside a heart of the person who wants to do that to someone else. Right? We make mistakes. I sin against brothers and sisters all the time, and I'm sorry when I do it to you. I know I do. I'm sorry, honey, when I do it to you. I'm not perfect. It's not an excuse, but we will butt heads with people in our relationships all the time. But it's another thing for me to purposely want to destroy your life, to take you and put you in the hands of someone I know is going to hurt you on purpose. That's tough, and that's the heart that Judas had towards Jesus. It wasn't ignorance. It wasn't rejection. It went way past that. Guys, people may do that in your life. People may do that in your own lives. You may have relationships that are like that, and guess what Jesus did? Knowing that was going to happen, knowing the result and knowing the reason, knowing the hatred in Judas's heart, Jesus said, I'm going to love them anyway. Wow. Guess what? He's done that for us. The reason we are here today is because God so loved us that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever should believe in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Knowing we were going to mess up, knowing that so many people would reject him, God said, it's okay, I'm going to love them anyway. See, that's the model that we need to follow because, see, Jesus stayed involved. And the last point in this one is when we wrap all of this together, the point here is don't confuse pretending with reality. And there's 2 reasons I'm saying this. First one, I think there's a lot of the disciples that confused Judas's devotion or so-called devotion to Jesus as maybe his love for him. Right? Judas hadn't been kicked out. We see in the end of this passage when Jesus said what he did to Judas, the disciples were like, well, what does that mean? Maybe he needs to go buy more food or whatever else. They never put two and two together. See, Judas, it was only after this that people understood what was in the heart of Judas. At this moment, he was a very good pretender. He looked like one of the club, one of the family. The other thing that I want to bring this out is Jesus didn't pretend either. Jesus didn't ignore the problem. In fact, he was moved to speak about it. He didn't let it just blow over. He didn't just ignore the elephant in the room. Now, he didn't come right out and say it, and there's reasons why we'll talk about in a second. But he made sure, I guarantee you, Judas knew who he was talking about, who Jesus was talking about. We can't pretend and be fake in our relationships. Jesus wasn't. And even though everybody else on the outside didn't understand what was going on, Jesus did. And he said that, you know what, there's a difference between going through the motions and understanding the reality of the situation. And that's one thing that we can do in a difficult relationship is, are we seeking to understand the reality? Are we seeking to not only know the results of this relationship, what it's going to lead to, but the reason why? Can we look at someone who is hurting us or is going to hurt us or has hurt us before and say, you know what, I'm going to love them anyway because the sin in their life is burning them up inside. It's killing them. See, guys, we would have a much different look on our neighbors or the people in the world, or even the people we think we hate, the people we don't agree with or disagree with. When they do something to hurt us, our response is to lash back out. But if we were able to look at them through the eyes of Jesus, the way Jesus did, what we would see is a hurting, dying, sorrowful individual. Someone who is acting out of pain, who is a slave to their sin in that moment. And we would not feel hatred. We'd feel pity. We'd be sad. And we would say, I want to help you. And that's what Jesus did. So the next point, next lesson learned is not only for a difficult relationship, how do we endure a difficult relationship? Well, I would say, and I would argue that if we were to follow Jesus' model, we will stay involved. Now, that doesn't mean that we will let someone trample on us. But it does mean that we are still involved. Maybe that's just simply through prayer. It doesn't matter, but we are involved and we are interested and we're investing in their life physically, personally, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. But after that, the next person we can talk about is John. And this is what I pulled out for John. John sought insight. Verse 23 through 26 says this: one of his disciples, whom Jesus loved, was reclining at table at Jesus' side. By the way, this is the first time in the Gospel of John we've seen this description of him. One of the disciples whom Jesus loved was reclining at table. The disciple whom Jesus loved is the author of the Gospel of John. He never says his name, John, but theologians and scholars, as we've pieced everything together and everything else, and based off church tradition and a lot of history, we're very, very positive that this book was written by the Apostle John. But he never speaks his own name. But he refers to himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved, which will be important in a second. So this disciple whom Jesus loved was reclining at table at Jesus' side. So Simon Peter motioned to him to ask Jesus of whom he was speaking. So that disciple, leaning back against Jesus, said to him, Lord, who is it? And Jesus answered, it is he to whom I will give this morsel of bread when I have dipped it. So when he dipped the morsel, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. See, Peter and John, in this, Jesus had said these words, and they dug in a little bit deeper, right? And guys, this is an uncomfortable comment that Jesus just made. I mean, they're probably in this time, they're sharing a feast. All of these things have been going on. Jesus has done all these miracles, and people are now getting to the point where they want to put him to death, and it was probably tense, right? The relationship, just the air in the room, because as soon as Jesus said, I tell you the truth, one of you are going to betray me, they're like, what in the world is going on? Is that you? Is it me? Can you feel that tension? And Peter's over there, hey, John, ask him who. This layout, it's really hard for me to picture this. John described this a little bit last week, and it's still really weird. The way they would have eaten at the table at this time is they probably would have been kind of around like a U-shaped table, and they would have been leaning on their left side and dipping like the bread or the little flat bread and stuff into the bowls, and they'd be eating with their right hand, leaning on their left, and they'd just be kind of in a row around the table here. So the picture here is that John... Sorry, my notes just went away. That John would have been leaning, and Jesus would have been just over his shoulder. Because when it says he leaned into Jesus, right? What's it say exactly? It says, it is he, so that disciple leaning back against Jesus said to him. So he kind of leaned back, he reclined at the table, and Jesus would have just been over his shoulder and said, hey, Jesus, who are you talking about? One of the reasons I bring this out is it shows how close that John was to Jesus. See, that was a place of honor. Being near the head, being near the guest was a place of honor in that culture. And John would have had that place of honor because in order for him to lean over and ask, there couldn't have been anybody between the two of them. So as John is seeking this insight, here's your first point in the outline. See, John experienced a moment. It's kind of a weird question that he asked. Not a weird question. I mean, we would have asked it, but this whole situation when I'm reading this is like, why is this in here? Why is it in the Bible? What was going on here? And I think we just need to understand the importance of how John related to Jesus and how close the two of them were. And John felt comfortable asking Jesus a very personal and potentially painful question. Let me ask you, in a difficult relationship or when you hear difficult things from someone that you love, that you know that they're hurting. Like so many times we'll say, hey, how you doing this morning? What we all hope to hear is, great, I'm doing good, moving fine. What you don't really want to hear, if we're honest with ourselves, is absolutely terrible. Because we don't know how to respond to that. We're like, okay, shake your hand and move on. I mean, we're not just naturally good at that because it's uncomfortable for us. I may even love that person a whole lot, but I don't want to feel pain. I don't want to be uncomfortable. John was close enough to Jesus. He was okay with the answer. He was okay with the answer not being something he really personally wanted to hear. Hey, Jesus, what's going on? Tell me more. See, he sought insight, and that was a very special moment, I think, that John describes in this circumstance. I want to tell you about another one, just to kind of put the perspective of how John and Peter even related to Jesus. In Mark chapter 9, 2 through 11, I'm just going to read a story. Most of you have heard this. It says, after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became radiant, intensely white, as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you and one for Moses and one for Elijah. For he did not know what to say, for they were terrified. And a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud, this is my beloved Son, listen to him. And suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them but Jesus. And as they were coming down the mountain, he charged them to tell no one what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. And so they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what this rising from the dead might mean. Guys, we need to seek out moments in our relationships. Don't wait until they are over to truly understand and appreciate what you have. Paul's not in here, but we were talking this morning. He said, after yesterday, he was at the memorial service, and my grandfather said, after yesterday, I really wish I would have gotten to know him better. I learned so much about that man yesterday. I heard several people say that. It was a great service. There was a lot of information. It was wonderful. And we learned a lot about my grandfather, heard great stories. But so many people said, I wish I would have known him better. I wish I would have gotten to know him better. Guys, now's the time to get to know people better. All right, I don't want to pass away. I don't want you to pass away and me say the same thing someday. I wish I would have gotten to see that side of that person. We have the opportunity to see that side of people now. We can do that. We can rejoice in each other. We can have community and relationship. And this church, Grace First Church, is a great start at doing that. That is why we are here. But don't let it stop on Sunday mornings. Don't let this be the only time you interact with someone. Come tomorrow to prayer and dig in deep spiritually, emotionally, prayerfully with one another. Come on the Sunday men fellowship group. It doesn't matter. Call somebody up and say, hey, would you like to go to lunch? Can I take you to lunch? And if you can't afford to take someone to lunch, call them and say, will you take me to lunch? It's okay. I give you permission. It's okay. And that other person says, I can't afford it either. Well, then call somebody else and make it 3. But dig in and share a moment with each other. John was willing to share a moment, and he had had moments before. That's why he was so close to Jesus, I believe. right? He was willing to invest himself into Jesus so that when those difficult times came up, he was okay for him and them, for the two of them to talk. That's why when we shake someone's hand and we ask them how you're doing, we don't like to hear the answer that's bad or I'm struggling. Because if we don't like to hear that answer, what that means is we haven't invested ourselves with that other person to the point that we're willing to listen and willing to share that part of their life. That is a good indication. If you're up there and you're okay saying, you know what, I had a terrible week, and you're okay with engaging that conversation, it means that you guys have had some moments together, that you've invested in each other, and you're willing to walk even the hard parts of life together. So that was John. And why did all this happen? That's the next outline. John explains a movement. See, what is the whole point of this story being in here? See, I think John was trying to explain, as he's writing this gospel, years after all this happened, I think John was trying to explain the character and the thought processes of Jesus, Judas, and the disciples at this point in time. See, he was trying to help us understand that there was a massive shift occurring at this moment. Jesus had spent years in ministry, doing wonderful things, teaching wonderful things with these men, with these 12 men and many others, and they had walked side by side, but he was about to die. This was the night before he was being betrayed. He was about to go to the cross, and he knew that, and there was this shift, and this separation started to occur. John put this in here so that we'd have a little bit better understanding about Jesus, about the confused disciples, because they weren't getting it. None of them knew anything at this point. It's funny that I don't even think John fully understood until afterwards. I mean, think about this. He says, Jesus, who's going to betray me? He says, it's the man I'm going to give the morsel to, and he sees him give it to Judas, and he's like, if that was me, hey, he's the guy. Get him. Hey, Peter, get out your sword and go get after him. The Bible's silent. None of that happened. So I think John was thinking, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't add up. Really, Judas? Why do I say that? See, Jesus gave this morsel of bread. Remember, Jesus is laying down. Right? His feet's outstretched. He's on his left side. John's there. It would have been kind of weird to reach around and, shove it into his mouth right there. So where was Judas? Right next to Jesus. Right next to Jesus. He dipped it up. Here you go, Judas. What did I say about the place of honor? Out of all 12 people, the two people that sat closest to Jesus were John and Judas. Even though Jesus knew Judas was going to betray him. What is going on? See, Jesus saw this difficult relationship, and like we would like to make them the outcast and put them at the end of the line, Jesus said, no. You're the one I need to talk to the most. You're the one that needs to be near me the most. You're the one that I need to honor and serve the most. But here's the note. Don't confuse proximity with relationship. Two people, Judas and John, laying and reclining at a table right next to Jesus, or so we believe. We're reading into this a little bit, right? Because I don't think Jesus got up and went around to the end of the table and handed him the morsel. So most scholars will believe that Judas was on Jesus's on the left side or the right side. I guess depends on how you look at him. But Judas wasn't one of the chosen. Judas wasn't a true follower. Judas wasn't a true believer. Judas was a great pretender. He had proximity to Jesus, but he did not have relationship with Jesus. I think someday we're going to get to heaven and we're going to realize that there's a lot of people in churches that are just like this, that were just like this. They showed up on Sunday morning. You came and heard a good message or a bad message. You came and had good worship or bad worship. You had good friends or bad friends, whatever it is with church. But you came to church, you were the good Christian, supposedly. You had proximity with Jesus and each other's, but you never had relationship. Don't confuse the two. If you're watching online, don't confuse the two. I want to say this will probably drop our viewership in half. But here's the honest truth. There are people who watch on Sunday mornings that just cannot physically be here for one reason or another. They're sick, they're injured, they're homebound, or whatever, they're traveling. They can't be here. And that's why we do this. We do this for them. What I don't want to do this for is for the person who says, I'm not willing to step inside of a church. I'm not willing to engage with people because I don't like church. I don't like Christians. I'm thanking you for watching this right now, and please don't stop. But the point is, that's just proximity. You can't be part of the body remotely. I mean, some people we have to, right? That's why we're there. But if you have an opportunity to come to church on Sunday morning, please come to church. If it's not this church, go to another church. Engage with people personally, because that's the only way these type of moments can happen. And if you can't, you don't have a church home, or you're homebound, or you're sick, call someone up, text them, say, hey, can we talk? Can we engage? Is there some other way that I can get to know you better? Because, guys, we all need good, strong relationships to get us through life. John was that. Judas was not. So let's not confuse the two. All right, finally. Judas sinned intentionally. Verse 27 through 30, then after he had taken the morsel, Satan entered into him. Jesus said to him, what are you going to do? Do quickly. Now no one at the table knew why he said this to him. Some thought that because Judas had the money bag, Jesus was telling him, buy what we need for the feast, or that he should give something to the poor. So after receiving the morsel of bread, he immediately went out, and it was night. The first point I want to make under here is Judas was deceived. Verse 27, then after he had taken the morsel, Satan entered into him. Judas was deceived by sin and Satan. We see this work in the Gospel of John as we've gone through this several weeks, and there's a little bit of tidbits of Judas, especially when Mary was washing Jesus' feet, and he's getting upset about it. Say, why wasn't this given to the poor? All this money she's wasted on you, Jesus. This wasn't a good investment. This wasn't a good idea. And then Jesus kind of rebuked Judas at that moment and said, hey, what she's doing out of love for me. Leave her alone. But we're getting glimpses into what was happening in Judas's heart. See, he was a very hurting, probably a very sad, a very lonely individual who had a complete incorrect view of who Jesus was and what he was there to do. See, Judas, I think, most people seems to indicate, was looking for that political power figure. He was looking for that earthly king, someone that was going to come, maybe free them from the Romans, someone who was going to usher in the Jewish community into like physical dominating power on earth. I mean, why wouldn't he think that? He'd seen Jesus do amazing things, raise people from the dead. He had seen him walk on water, feed 5,000 people with a couple loaves and a couple fish. If what you are seeking is a powerful earthly king, Jesus would have been a great person to follow. But then it started to shift, right? Jesus' teaching started shifting. He started talking about his death, and he started talking about serving people and humbling himself and washing feet. And this isn't a king at all. This isn't someone I thought he was. And he began, his heart, his mind, he must have been thinking, this is not what I signed up for. This is wrong. This isn't who I need. Guys, that is the deception of Satan. That goes back to the Garden of Eden. When Satan's talking to Eve and Adam, and it's like, here's this fruit. Oh, isn't it so good to look at? God didn't really say you die. In fact, if you eat this, you'll be like God. It's a good thing. Don't listen to God at all. That's not what you need. He's not what you need. You're what you need. Your own strength is what you need. Judas was deceived by sin and by Satan. But he also decided, which is your next point. So after receiving the morsel of bread, he immediately went out, and it was night. Some people are going to disagree with me on this, and we can dig in, and I'm not going to say this. This is my best understanding to date of how things work. But I could be wrong, so please don't take this. But there's a lot of people that talk about, the devil made me do it. And I believe that people can be indwelt, emboldened, and even empowered by Satan, but we are not controlled by him, ever. Personal belief, my understanding of the Bible. I could be wrong. But generally, I think it's definitely true. The devil made me do it is never an excuse. We and we alone are responsible for our choices and our actions. Jesus had given Judas time and time and time again the opportunity to repent, all the way up to this last moment when he gave that morsel of bread. That also was a sign of honor, and taking that was a sign of loyalty. Saying, I accept this from your hand, I am yours. That's what this whole meal and this whole giving the morsel represented. If you took that from the head of the house, you were proclaiming your loyalty to that person. Even then, Jesus was asking Judas, are you sure you really want to go through with this? Are you really going to do this? But knowing what was in Jesus' heart, Jesus took it, even though he was going to betray him, basically. Told Jesus to go fly a kite. And Jesus said, okay, what you're going to do quickly. Let's get it over with. It's time. Judas was deceived, but Judas also decided. Last note, don't confuse pride with righteousness. See, I personally believe Judas thought he was doing the right thing. Why else would he do this? I think Judas had convinced himself, the devil had convinced Judas, however it worked. Judas was to the point where he thought betraying Jesus was the right answer. His own pride, his own view of what Jesus was supposed to be or what he was supposed to do got in the way of doing what was right. I do this so often. I'm so bad at this. I joke about it. I'm always right. If I wasn't right, I'd change my mind. Right? I want to be right. But the truth is, I'm not always right. And there are many, many times in my life where I've let my own pride, I've mistaken that. I took that as righteousness. It's like, I'm doing the right thing. I know this is the right answer, right solution. And then I realize it's not. I think that's what was happening with Judas right now. Jesus knew it was going to happen. The Bible said it had to happen. But Judas missed something in his relationship. When we have relationships with people, especially when we have hard and difficult relationships with people, please, guys, try not to miss things. Try not to miss the hurting. Try not to miss the pain. Jesus gave him a place of honor. They gave him the money bag. They entrusted him. They did everything they could to welcome him into the fold. And Judas didn't want any of it. But Jesus did it anyway. Which is the thought. By predicting both his betrayal and his betrayer, Jesus proved that his cross was his choice. By predicting both his betrayal and his betrayer, Jesus proved that his cross was his choice. See, guys, Jesus knew the result, and it went way beyond the betrayal. It went all the way to the death, all the way to the cross. And he chose it anyway. Giving of our life and our love is our choice too. And we could and should choose to give it even when we know we will never get it back. Especially when we know we will never get it back. There is no excuse. If we take these lessons, if we take this situation and we pull it out, we extract it, and we apply it to our own personal lives today, what I get out of this is that I should never stop investing in someone, even when I think it's a lost cause, even if I know it's a lost cause, and especially when I know it's a lost cause. Because that's what Jesus did. That's what he did. And it may never have the result that we want, but it's okay because you know what it is? It's called love. It's called giving of yourself for someone else with the hope to make them better. And that was my last thing I'm going to close with. That was another thing I learned about my grandfather. All these stories, they're just telling people about all the things that he did. And it was funny. Don't do this. But the one I got the best was the guy that was working out. My grandpa was a big bodybuilder and stuff like that. And so talked about, he dropped my grandfather just let it go, his spot, and just let the weight go, and it landed on the guy's chest. He thinks he may have cracked a rib. He's like, why in the world did you do that? He said, you weren't trying hard enough. It's this idea and this concept that everything we should do for someone else is to help them become a better person, and not better morally, not better politically, not better socially, although all those programs are good, but they better stem from one thing and one thing only, better spiritually, better personally with Jesus Christ. That's the goal. And anything I can do to help you draw closer to Jesus, please come talk to me. Please come talk to John. Travis, now's a great time. We're going to close in prayer. Guys, this is it. And my encouragement to you this morning is don't let a life pass away and refuse to invest in it because it doesn't meet your agenda. That's what Judas did. Judas wrote Jesus off because he didn't measure up. But Jesus didn't write Judas off, even knowing he didn't measure up. And that's what we can take from this today. So when we're involved in difficult situations, difficult relationships, and hard, remember to stay involved. Remember to seek insight into that person's life. And don't sin intentionally against them. Don't choose your own pride above the righteousness of Jesus Christ. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this morning. Father, I thank you for your church. Father, I thank you for this message, what it's meant to me. Father, just to encourage me to invest in people in a way that I don't naturally want to do. But knowing the importance that even the man who is going to betray you, Jesus, even the man who is going to cause your imprisonment, your punishment, and your death, you reached out, you honored, you served, you loved. Help us do the same. For in Jesus' name we pray.